Hey everybody, tomorrow we start a new sermon series in the book of Ephesians. And in order to do that, we really need a little bit of introduction. But as I'm doing my prep and thinking through the service tomorrow with the Lord's Supper being celebrated and time constraints, I just know that there's going to be something that needs to be left on the desk, if you will, and not brought to the worship service tomorrow. And so that's what I want to share with you now. And what I'm going to leave on the desk for purposes of the sermon tomorrow is really an introduction into this book of Ephesians. And so what I want to do in this little short video is to just give you a few words of introduction that I won't be able to share tomorrow, but I think is pretty helpful context for studying this letter that we're going to be doing, looking at the first two chapters specifically over the next couple of months this fall. Now, the letter to the Ephesians, as it's commonly referred to, was written by the Apostle Paul. There's no valid scholarly reason to doubt that. Paul, who was a guy, very respected member of the Jewish religious order of the Pharisees, that was known for its very scrupulous obedience to the law, to the Torah. Paul was converted, quite suddenly, in fact. Paul was converted when Jesus appeared to him one day on the road to Damascus. You can read about this in the book of Acts. And this is interesting because Paul, in his day, was pretty deep into cancel culture. He was the cancel culture of his day. His mission at that time, before Jesus interrupted his plans, Paul was trying to cancel anyone who was speaking about Jesus. That was what he viewed to be his mission. And here Jesus just pops up as he's on the road to Damascus one day, and Paul, all of a sudden, is confronted with a new understanding of the world and how everything works, how everything in the world works, and how everything that he had known in the law of God had actually been misunderstood and was pointing to something entirely different than what he had conceived. And from that moment forward, Paul spent the rest of his life telling people about this guy Jesus, who up to that point he had been working to cancel. Now, by the time we get to this letter here, this letter to the Ephesians, Paul is now towards the end of his ministry. He's probably writing the book of Ephesians from prison. We get that from looking at some of the passages, some of the references he makes later in the letter. And so it was probably written around 62 AD or so, most scholars believe. That's when Paul was in Rome. And he's writing it, he says, to the saints in Ephesus. And saints, we have to remember, saints is not, when you say someone's a saint, or Paul's writing to the saints, he says, he's not talking about a category of like superstar Christians. Like there's Christians and then there's saints. They're the superstars. No, these aren't people that have passed some sort of special test. The word saints in the New Testament really is used to refer to any Christian, because a Christian is someone, by definition, who has been set apart, sanctified. Which means, of course, that the primary audience that Paul is writing to is Christians in a local church, right? Which is perfect for us, because that means that the application is pretty easy, because when we come to listen to us discuss and study the book of Ephesians, the letter to the Ephesians over the next couple months, we're Christians in a local church. So it's pretty easy to make the jump to application there. And it's made even easier because Ephesians is a pretty general letter, right? In fact, it might be the most general of all the letters that Paul wrote. In other words, it's not, as you read it, addressing some particular controversy or some special situation in the Ephesian church. In fact, many scholars believe that the letter was written to the Ephesians, but it was also widely circulated throughout the region. And what that means then is that Christians in any local church, like ours, can read the letter and with full confidence say, this is being written to me. Now, but let me just say this, and I need to continue to say things like this, right? Just because this letter was written to Christians, it doesn't mean that if you're visiting our church, or maybe someone invites you to come to our church or watch the teaching on YouTube or something like that, it doesn't mean that if you're investigating Christianity, right, that it doesn't mean that there isn't anything here for you. The letter's written to Christians, you say. It's not for me. No. In fact, just the opposite. Right? We live in a world right now where it's very fashionable to try to understand someone's identity. Right? Even to empathize with someone's understanding of him or herself, right? With their experiences and with their views. And so if you resonate with that impulse to try to understand someone else's identity, well, then I'd like to invite you, if you're not a Christian now, then I'd like to invite you to be consistent with that desire to be empathetic with someone else and their expression of their identity. I'd like you to extend that same courtesy to Christians, right? Extend that same courtesy to us, because what Paul is doing in this letter, particularly in the first half of the letter, is he's painting a picture of Christian identity, what it means to be a Christian. It's an extended meditation on who a Christian is. Right? And the radical change in identity that takes place when Jesus intervenes in your life, just like happened to Paul on the road to Damascus. Right? So that's rather a rather extended introduction, but that's what I think is really important for us to understand as we launch into our study, a study that starts tomorrow. And I hope that you'll join us for that.